Welcome to another edition of Speak Up Presents. Tonight we're going to be talking about a very important document, and it's called the Earth Charter. And we're fortunate to have with us three people very involved in this movement. And they are Genie Skypek, welcome. Glad you could make it today. Board member of the Earth Charter. Appreciate your coming. George Sherman, thank you for attending. You're also a board member too, or
no, just a regular.
Just
member.
a plain ordinary
board,
member. That's good enough for us. And the founder here in Tampa, Jan Roberts. Welcome. I'm glad you could be here today.
Thanks, Louise.
Jan, why don't you start us off and tell us what is the Earth Charter for people who've not heard of this document yet?
Probably the most succinct way to put it is it's a people's declaration of interdependence. It's about the fact that thousands and thousands of people all around the globe wrote a document to secure the future so that we have sustainability and we have economic justice and we have respect for nature. And it took 10 years for these people to do this in open fields and in their meeting halls to write a set of principles to guide us so that any policies or any practices we engage in are based on taking care of other folks and taking care of life on this planet.
Whose idea was this?
It actually came out of the 1992 Earth Summit where Sweden, they had a commission on sustainable development that the UN held in Sweden, and Mikhail Gorbachev was one of the instrumental people who said, you know, we need a charter for the Earth. We're going downhill fast. We need to do something about sustaining our planet. And so they thought at the Rio Earth Summit we'd have governments, including the US government, sign off on a document to sustain us. And the US wouldn't sign because there was several principles they didn't like. One had to do with intellectual property rights. They didn't think indigenous people had a right to their own wisdom. They thought we could go in and patent it. So they wouldn't sign off on the document. So out of the summit came the Rio Declaration. But there were 18 to 20,000 people there representing different non-governmental organizations who said, all right, we'll write our own document. And they started the process.
Where were they?
Brazil.
In Brazil, okay.
In the Rio Earth Summit in Brazil.
And
then after that, they came out with their document and they danced on the beach in Brazil and had a great time. And then nothing happened. And then finally Gorbachev said, you know, wait a minute, let's forget about governments. Let's take this to the people. Let's get people gathering in their different countries and have them write what principles they think we need. And so it's basically 16 principles on respect for nature, peace, democracy, economic justice, and human rights.
well, we want to hear more about the points of them, but you know, when you hear the term Earth Charter, you think environment. Is that, George, a great deal of this or a little bit of it, or?
You know, one of the interesting things about the Earth Charter is that it does deal with the Earth, but in the context of the life that's on it. So yeah, there's a part about taking care of the Earth environmentally, but humans are part of the people on this Earth. And humans play a huge role in how that environment works or doesn't work. For instance, as the Earth Charter points out, one of the largest negative impacts on the environment is poverty. And just simply getting humans out of grinding poverty will do more to improve the environment than virtually anything else that we can do. You can't just take it out of context. So people say, well, plant a few trees. That won't make any difference. It's a whole way of looking at how we want to live on the Earth. One of the things that attracts me to the Earth Charter, we listen to politicians always tell us what we have to stop doing. And you hear people arguing about what we can't do. And you hear people talking about, well, I don't want you to do this, or I don't. No one talks about what it is that we should be doing. And I teach ethics, and so we deal a lot with what is it that we ought to do. Not what should we not do, but what ought we to do. And the Earth Charter is an ethical framework for how ordinary people living on the planet can work together to create a sustainable society, a sustainable global society, so that we all win. And none of us has to truly lose. If we can't figure out a way to all work together, it's just a pipe dream to think that we can go on plundering the earth this way, and now we're going to have China and India plunder the earth like we did, and then Brazil and Argentina. Just not going to happen. There's not enough stuff on earth to do it. So what do you do instead? Well, the Earth Charter lays that out, and it says, you know, there's a whole bunch of things that have to happen if we want it to be sustainable. And sustainable doesn't mean that America can keep doing it. It means the whole entire earth has to be able to run for the long-term future doing whatever it is that we're doing now. And so if you look at things that way and you realize, well, geez, if we're using up all the oil and we're not thinking about what else to do instead, and we're not figuring out other ways to do the environment, it runs out. People say, well, it won't run out for 100 years. Okay. Do we want an Earth for 100 years from now? Do we think there's going to be any progeny 100 years from now? I mean, the argument that you can't look that far in the future is a goofy argument, because what are people going to do 100 years from now when they go, geez, why didn't they do something when they had a chance? So the Earth Charter is a positive way to say, hey, look, we're all in this together. How can we work to save the whole ball of wax, which includes plants and animals, but it also includes humans, and it includes human societies. You know, how do you, what does it mean to be a human, and how do humans find value in their lives? It's not wealth. And there's just a ton of research to show more wealth does not make you happier. In fact, after you reach about $10,000 a year, more wealth starts to negatively impact your happiness. And some countries, like ours, have identified material wealth as human wealth, and that's just not true. There are many countries who have vastly less income than we do that score much higher on measures of happiness. Costa Rica, for instance, scored higher on 4 separate measures of personal well-being by 4 different groups from Scandinavia, United Nations, and yet they have 1/10 the income that we do.
Genie, how do you account for that? You're the psychologist in the group. I just...
I'm speechless. How do I
You're never speechless.
It's up to you.
Come on. How do you account for that? The happiness of people
in poor nations.
in poor nations, or, you know.
You know, those are big questions that I don't just have answers to. You've got answers to it.
Well, only because
Jan?
I've looked at some of that research that George is talking about. In fact, there is an international effort to use happiness to measure wealth in a country rather than the gross domestic product. And what they're finding is that in countries where there's a higher degree of community, where people can really count on one another, where people are there for one another, where people can trust one another, there's higher levels of happiness.
They haven't touched this in Florida, I take it.
No. No.
Or California,
We're
or
working on it.
someplace like that,
Yeah, right.
We're working on it.
where a neighborhood isn't so, as valued. Well, Jeannie, let me ask you then how you view what the work is that you're doing with the Earth Charter.
Well, actually, to pick up on what Jan said a little bit earlier, one of the things that I actually have been involved in doing, I end up being sort of a support person to the operation. Go out and learn little bits and pieces about some of the projects. One of the things that I've been involved in and probably most interested in is this Earth Charter Indicators project that Jan wants to get going in this city as well as others, where what we really do is come up with some indicators or some measures of community well-being that come from the people. Most of the projects that or most of the communities where these things have been developed, people use measures that have already been established. They use measures that are, some of the measures are fairly easy to get, and common measures, regular kinds of economic measures, like the gross domestic product, which mostly measures trouble. You have to have lots and lots of trouble to be wealthy. You know, hurricanes, for example, made Florida wealthy. And that's why everybody's leaving, because nobody can, you know, nobody who doesn't make a lot of money can afford to live here anymore. Well, there's lots of money that had to be spent to rebuild. There's lots of insurance money, all of that stuff counts for what is valued as wealth in this country. And so some of the things that would be really exciting would be to find out what people in the community define as meaningful to them, and then come up with those measures. Like, I mean, an interesting example of that, if someone said that for them, a community felt like a safe place if they saw children playing outside. We don't see children playing outside anymore, unless there's...
Too darn hot here.
Well, part of it. But part of it is they have to have play dates, they have to arrange for safety and all this other stuff. So one of the things that you could do is actually get people in the community involved in counting, and they could do drive-by counts, you know, how many kids do they see in the neighborhood. Now, we're not going to be able to get that data any other way because it's not part of what the government counts. But it might be really way more meaningful to people to count whether a neighborhood starts to feel safer by looking at how many kids are out in the streets playing.
Or how many neighbors are on each other's porches,
That's
for
right.
example.
Talking to each other,
Something
doing
like
things
that.
like that.
Well, that's like that Harvard study that John Holton did on neighborhoods, Genie. Want to tell them about that one? That was critical.
Well, yeah. One of the things that he measured was social connectedness, and actually found that what made a neighborhood safe. They, you know, most of the time when people look at cutting down criminal activity in the neighborhood, it's by getting law enforcement involved or implementing a number of different kind of community
Crime
policing
watch.
activities and
Right.
things like this. But what they found was if neighbors felt like they could trust each other, and if neighbors were likely to say to someone who came into the neighborhood, "What are you doing here?" that actually there was way less criminal activity in the neighborhood. So people being out, being involved, being connected with each other is important for that.
And the kids did better.
In trying to find out more things like this, does that mean there's going to be even a progression of what's there already in the Earth Charter? I mean, it's going to change, or it's going to be more fluid, or you're trying to find out some of these things, but pretty much the document's written?
The document is considered organic, and that means in another 5 years, if there is a need to add to the principles or change them in any way, that will be done. But because the drafting session went on for 10 years and involved so many people, it's seen as a pretty complete document. And it's to use as a guide. What we've been talking about with the community stuff that Genie was talking about and I mentioned earlier is that the core value of the Earth Charter is community. And I remember Trevor Purcell is on our National Advisory Board, and I said to him, you know, he's from the Caribbean, and I said, you know, what do you think is so important about the Earth Charter? He said, community. You know, when you grow up in a place where you really are connected to other folks, and if you're out fishing and you come in and you have so much fish and you share with others, you can count on other people for things. He said, there's a far stronger sense of happiness and togetherness. The Earth Charter has principles about that, but it also has principles about taking care of animals, which was actually a rather controversial principle.
Would you read that for us so we know one of these? I know it's a
So
pretty
I'll
long
give you
document.
a concrete: treat all living beings with respect and consideration, prevent cruelty to animals kept in human societies, and protect them from suffering. The words treat all living beings with respect and consideration was part of a dialogue that took place in Italy, Assisi, Italy, because Gorbachev had learned that the hunting cultures of the Arctic were not happy with the original words, which were with respect and compassion. And the hunters were saying, we respect the animals, but we do not feel sorry for them, because that's how they were defining compassion. So there was a dialogue with the hunters from the Greenland and from people from all over the globe that came together in Assisi to work out how to protect the spirit of the Earth Charter, which was to respect and be caring about animals, and at the same time not interfere with hunters who want to, of course, kill animals to survive or to eat. And so I happened to be there for that, and it was just wonderful because I remember one of the monks there said, respect and reverence for all life, and I got very excited. I thought, oh, I like that word, reverence, and hunters went, no, because reverence means bow down, and we only bow down to God, not to animals. And so the discussion went on for a couple of hours, and they finally came up with respect and consideration for all living beings. That
Seems
kind
like
of
such
work.
an impossible task. In one language, words have so many different meanings and
Right.
implications to people that, and then you're working with people with all sorts of different languages.
This is why this is so unprecedented, Louise. This whole drafting process has never, ever occurred for an international document. And the Earth Charter's been translated into 32 languages. So it's just...
How many people have signed off on this, George, do you know, or organizations, or...
4,000 organizations? Is that what's on their website?
It's up to 22,000
22,000?
organizations.
If you go to earthcharter.org, one of the links goes to all the organizations that have endorsed it, and it's real time, so you can look and see who did it 15 minutes ago. And you can endorse it yourself, as I have, and,
yeah.
and all of my friends have.
And the reason for going in this direction of trying to get organizations and even individuals are endorsing
Individuals are critically important. Ordinary folks are what we're aiming for.
is because were there any governments that did accept it, endorse it, and whatever? Is it just the United States that's been reluctant?
No, it's not a matter of having the governments endorse this now. They were trying to get the governments to write this originally, but we interfered with that. And there were others. But there are countries, well, you know this better than I do, George,
Yeah.
about those countries that support
Costa Rica is the only country that has fully endorsed the Earth Charter and put in measurements for the government to look at how they're performing, actually the government and the people, about how they're performing. And every kid that goes through elementary school has to learn the principles of the Earth Charter. And not too coincidentally, the Earth Charter International Secretariat's in Costa Rica at the University for Peace. But other countries have adopted part of it or adopted as a goal for the future, if not necessarily an active. But many governmental organizations have adopted it. States or counties, lots of cities have adopted it and done the same thing. Take the Earth Charter and then create a measure to see how are...
Can you give me an example of a measure for some of this? I mean, I don't know how you could measure animals not suffering, for example, but there's probably other things.
Well, you
I
could
guess you could put
yeah.
programs in place where there's no more homeless pets or this kind of thing. But
If you just look at the issue of poverty,
okay,
respect for people, what is it that the government is doing in its policies that lead to that kind of an outcome? When you say preserve the community, what is it that the city is doing to preserve the community?
You mean in development, for example, that in promoting
Right.
development that is friendly to community
Look at
get-togethers
Portland.
and stuff,
Portland had a
like
bunch
celebration or something like this.
Well, it's more fundamental than that. It even goes to infrastructure. Portland, Oregon had a bunch of freeways going through it, much as Tampa did.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, well, there's just not enough. We need to make it larger. And the communities that would have had to have their houses torn down, so we don't want it. We like the way we are. So the city said, okay, that is not a solution. We cannot destroy communities for transportation. So instead, they put in a system of trains. And they say, you want to sit in the freeway in a jam, that's your business. But the business of our government is to preserve the community. So that was an infrastructure decision to preserve the community while still meeting the needs of the larger society through transportation, even though those individuals in the cars would have chosen to tear down the neighborhoods and drive their cars. Now, that kind of equality doesn't really happen. We're, for the first time ever, I'm hearing in our area, well, let's have some form of rapid transit rather than building another beltway around the city. But what the Earth Charter does when you lay it out that way, and if you go to earthcharter.org, there's the actual documents that those governments use to determine their compliance with the Earth Charter. Some of it with environmental. There's a movement now, as you probably know, for cities and states to do more to reduce greenhouse gas emissions than our federal government's doing. And that because community occurs much further down than the national level, at least in the United States.
And it's not only about governments.
It's true, like California instituted some laws about what cars can be sold there, what the mileage is going to be, and I don't know, when is that, 2008 or 2010 or something like
that? 2010, I think.
Yeah, where they have to get a certain amount of mileage, and the federal government's way anxious, far behind.
And it's not only just about governments doing something on the local or national level. It's also about people and what people can do in their community. And one of the things we want to pay attention to here is how people survive who don't have a whole lot of money, and some of the things that we find from other communities, like local currency programs with people getting paid so much by time. It's called time dollars. So if I do car repair, it's worth $10 an hour, and I can exchange that for even credit union money in Ithaca, New York. It's just an incredible program.
That's different.
Yeah.
You're on Speak Up.
Yes, good evening, folks. First of all, I appreciate your topic tonight. I have two questions for the panel. First of all, when it comes to countries like Africa and when it comes to protection of, say, gorillas, we've seen a decrease in literally of 75% in the amount of gorillas that are still able to survive. But what with the corruption of the government and the lack of park rangers, what can we do to expect to actually protect certain species like this who are threatened with extinction when it comes to actually, say, when governments aren't actually putting forth any effort towards the actual prevention?
Thank you.
That's a big question and a huge problem. And one of the things that the Earth Charter calls for is accountability and transparency. And in government, when he's talking about the corrupt government, Transparency International actually publishes reports on that kind of thing and does watchdog work. So, but it takes, I think the first thing that it takes is really deep awareness about what is happening. I mean, I didn't know 75% were being wiped out. So that kind of thing, and then getting our government and our people that are going over there to do the right thing.
So you think then that the movement has to be from the individual level on up rather than, I mean, you take Africa, for example, it would have to be the residents, would it not, Genie, the people,
Look at what's going on here in Florida around taxes and insurance. The
Right.
government's not addressed it. It's been a problem for a couple of years or longer. And that now, because the people at the bottom are screaming and yelling, talking about leaving, it's become an issue. They could just
So
look
make
at it right
noise.
here.
So
Yeah.
make noise. Get out there and make noise. We're tired of this.
The problem with the wildlife in Africa, but especially the gorillas, is twofold. One of them is that they're caught in between the wars, or the warring factions. And I don't know that anyone knows what those people are actually fighting about, including themselves, but the animals get caught up in it. And the other is what's called bushmeat, because they eat them. I mean, that's a source of protein for them. Organizations are trying to deal with that by saying, look, what is the role that the animal plays in their life, in the local people's lives, and can we replace that in some way that the folks will accept it? In some areas, they've done that, especially with elephants, where they hire the people who are there to take care of the elephants. So now the elephants being alive is a financial payoff to the families who live around the elephant preserve. Whereas before, killing them was how they got money. When you look at ecotourism, that's the thought behind ecotourism is if you can get the money to the local people to take care of the environment instead of having the only payoff to them to plunder the environment, then that's what the people are going to do. In all of their traditions, they're supposed to hold life sacred. But in times of war and in times of corruption and times of starvation, those ideals take a back seat. And what Earth Charter wants to do is make those things take a front seat and help those folks to meet their needs without having to plunder the environment.
We need to find some suggestions for people about how we can do this, how we can make these changes, but we're going to take a little break and we'll be back in just a minute.
You know because they die. Can you handle the truth?
Hate,
discrimination,
racism. You've got the power to make a change. Begin by spending 1 week at Anytown. For 1 week, come together with 50 students to share a special experience.
Maybe they saw people that were like them and people that weren't like them. When they're going to leave here, they're going to realize that everybody's really the same.
I didn't expect it to be this fun. I didn't think it was going to be, but it's been a blast.
friends.
Build friendships that will last forever. Experiences.
At Anytown, you share your experiences and listen to others in a fun, non-threatening way.
Community.
This is our community, and we are the future.
We must work to make it a place where all people are accepted and needed. You've got the power to make a change, and Anytown is where you begin to make that change.
By getting to know who you are and learning about others from different backgrounds.
Many Anytowners arrive not knowing who they are or what they want to do with their lives. When the week is over, they've learned a lot about themselves and others.
People are the same. They share a lot of the things that you share.
I can really talk to them better, and I feel comfortable with talking to them.
Anytown gives you the chance to express yourself in a safe, non-judgmental environment. You get to really share what you care about with others, who also open up and share.
Anytown opens your mind and your heart.
Participate in the Epilepsy Services Foundation's 14th annual hair racing experience. Run in our 10K and 5K races or join us in our 1 mile fun walk. Runners in all age categories will be awarded first, second, and third place prizes. Refreshments will be served. For more information, please call 813-870-3414 or contact us at epilepsyservices.com.
You're watching Speak Up, and we're talking about the Earth Charter with Genie Skypek, George Sherman, and Jan Roberts. I know you were talking during the break about making a big effort to get more people involved by using the knowledge of somebody we've heard about a little bit.
Yeah, Joe Trippi, who was the wizard that did the Howard Dean campaign on the internet and really changed how the internet's being used for electoral campaigns. He is coming to town on November 12th in order to help launch the grassroots Earth Charter campaign via the internet. And it's very interesting how he tells the story about what he made happen, because he said, we didn't go out there to get money for Howard Dean. What we went out there to do was to create a community online that was talking about Howard Dean. And so they started with 132 people. That was all they had. And it grew to 650,000 people online. And then they went and they made the website such that it had Get Local software, so people could just put in their zip code and connect with people in their community and meet up and talk about what they were going to do to help elect Howard Dean. And that was like 190,000 people, and they had 24-hour web TV where people were shooting different things related to Howard Dean, and they would run it on the internet. We're going to do all of that, and we're starting with a core group of 3,000, so we're ahead of Howard Dean already.
How long did it take him to go from 132 to 600,000?
How long was that campaign?
A year or so?
Yeah, it must have been a year, and we're planning on doing this forever. This is just
and of course,
the beginning.
they were only targeting the United States, and
right.
you're going to go
this is
so
global.
much.
But out of that, what will happen is if you bring in people and get them talking in their community about the Earth Charter, then you'll get people forming Earth Scout groups, because we've got that, the League of Earth Charter Voters, different things going on there, the Community Indicator Project, getting into school lesson plans. I mean, that's how it's all going to, it's happening on that way now, but it's going to happen far faster and broader.
Well, without a political agenda either, right?
No.
Because are you attracting liberals, conservatives, green, everybody?
Yeah, we actually are. In fact, our steering committee for the our steering committee for the Joe Trippi event, I laugh about, it's pretty split between Republicans and Democrats. But one of the things that really convinced me, and this was you want to tell them about that study on the Commission on Children at Risk and the findings of
the
that?
Hardwired to Connect?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Hardwired to Connect study was looking at why children, adolescents especially, were having problems in the community. And what the research was conducted by Dartmouth College and in conjunction with the Institute for
American Values. Very conservative
think tank, and the YMCA and the Search Foundation. And what they reviewed all the literature, and what they found was that as adults, we are not providing a sense of community to adolescents. That during the adolescent time, kids need a connection. They need a connection to a higher purpose, they need a connection to their community, and they need a connection to the ethics that underlie that community. And what they found instead was, instead of explaining the ethics, we just told them what the rules were and told them you have to follow it. And we gave them the message that you really don't belong here, you're the enemy. And so kids in their search for community join gangs, join cliques or whatever subculture they're into rather than the dominant community because they need those things and they're searching for them. And the outcome of this study was that adults have to come together, figure out what it is that we stand for, what our community stands for, and then how can we reach out to kids to communicate that to kids. And in Pinellas County, where I'm from, St. Petersburg College, my employer, and the two YMCAs are doing that right now. We're in the process of pulling together leadership in the community. We just started our first 3-year action plan and with Pinellas County Schools to create the links between the schools and the community to give the kids the message that you belong, we want you here, you're a valuable member, and here's what it is that we stand for and why it is we want you to be involved in it.
And the Earth Charter is the guiding document for that. And what excited me about that study when I found out about it was because it was conservative organizations and the Institute for American Values that were recommending a community that is exactly the same kind of community we're talking about when we talk about an Earth Charter community. So David Blankenhorn, who is the founder and director of the Institute for American Values, is now on a national advisory board. So
it's interesting how even in the media reform movement, which I have some involvement in, that you have this huge difference in politics, but everybody is involved in the fact that they believe in reforming media so people are better in touch with it, can trust it again, so that with all the media mergers and consolidations, we don't lose localism, which is the same thing with what you're talking about here. I got a letter in to the editor in the paper today about public access television in the St. Pete Times. Someone had written and said, no one is writing about the TV stations, networks are not covering local politics. And so I wrote in and said, oh, but the public access channel is, and this is why you need a public access channel in every community, because we don't have as big an audience. So we don't need to appeal to someone in Lakeland or Polk County, as does our local network affiliates have a multiple county area, so they can't focus on the neighborhood, the little group, the whatever, and so I think we're on the same mission. But what I found at these media conferences, I've attended these media reform conferences, is there's religious groups there, environmental groups, rap singers, you know, liberals, conservatives, Green Party, but
Right.
and they're all interested in that same topic. And I almost think we ought to all get involved with it to spread the word with the alternative media that attend those kinds of things.
Absolutely.
I still am fascinated with this, the fact that you're trying to bring together with, I guess you talked earlier, Jeannie, about some kind of general language or not so much specificity in the language of the Earth Charter, and for good reason. And we have so many different cultures. That's what I was thinking about, how we have, you're trying to involve people who may not think of gender equality and so forth. Can you comment on that?
Sure. I mean, this actually relates back to one of your earlier questions about how is the Earth Charter going to change? And certainly I would think that it would, but the process of writing this thing was done in such a way that the words that people chose were words that lots of different people had input on. And even concepts, like, for example, with regard to gender equality. There was one of the meetings in South Africa, they were discussing that principle on gender equality. And the men were insisting that it was important to keep the traditions that women put their men first. And so there was a lot of discussion going on around that. The women were not necessarily liking that. However, they were taking a very strong stand. Finally, there was a white woman from Nigeria who stood up and said that one of her traditions included putting white men before black men. And she commented that she thought traditions that affect the well-being of others negatively should be changed. And the black men heard and made a change and decided to agree on the value of giving women some recognition and equality. So to me, that's one, again, I mean, we go back to that, you've already talked about it, but I think the process of people trying to agree on concepts and terms really does bring them together, especially whoever led these discussions certainly did it in a way, I guess, that didn't generate lots of fighting.
Important. I was reading in the preamble this idea of universal responsibility. Can you comment on that, Jan or George?
Let me find it. Universal responsibility.
Well, why we
all
want it, because of, you know, some compelling argument about why we are all responsible. Even though, as George said earlier, you know, you talk about 100 years from now, well, I'm not going to be here. Maybe our world is just so, like, immediate, we don't think about, you know, next year, let alone 100 years from now.
And I think what the Earth Charter says is that we stand at a critical time in Earth's history, a time when humanity must choose its future. And we have a responsibility as humans to make a choice that will take us down the path of sustainability, that will take us down the path of living our lives and having policies and practices that don't interfere with the lives of those yet to come.
And we've got war happening all over the place.
I know. This is so timely.
How do we speak to that then? Because it's happening, it looks like it's going to be forever and ever, because now some of these are turning into religious kind of wars. And
you know, that's interesting you say that. There's different thinking about whether it's religious war or not, and I know Genie and I sometimes don't even agree on that. But I remember just seeing a television program about global wars, and that it often has to do with the economics rather than the religious. You have extremists in all religions, but that's a fraction of the people. And so those people that are moderate voice are those people that would speak out for the Earth Charter if we were to make it safer, if we were to get the word out that there's more of us that agree with these principles than disagree.
We got a question. You're on speaker.
Yeah, hi. I just tuned in a little while ago, and I'm really interested in this organization, Earth Charter. And I was curious because my brother has two toddlers, two girls, and I want them to eventually get into this sort of organization and you know, really learn what it's like to bring peace into the world. And I know that you guys have some sort of youth group. Can you talk a little bit about that? And what is the age that children can enter into this youth group?
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's Earth Scouts, and it's something that we worked on for a couple of years here in Tampa, and finally got a little bit of money to have Kelly Lepardo, who is a former middle school teacher and a homeschooling mom, to put together an Earth Scouts guide that has activities from 3 years old to 13 years of age for boys and girls that fulfill these different principles, things that they can do at home, in school, and in the community. It's a wonderful guide at www.earthscouts.org, and we're getting a listserv going, and we're going to have an interactive website. So it's already out there, the guide's there, so you just go to the website and take a look at it, and it's got our phone number and a way to contact us.
When they were having these discussions about, you know, peace, or you have peace here, nonviolence, peace, how did that go? I mean, were you having discussions with, like we were just talking about war, and I just wondered, were there any?
I don't have any examples available to me. Do you know?
Yeah, I know some of it, and what it is that basically that the Earth Charter is saying we need to go in a direction of peace, that nobody likes war, and even in the dialogues, nobody was saying we like war. Nobody wanted to see their children killed. No one wanted to see their cities devastated, but what they did want was a way of living so that their children go to school and they could go to work and they could have a life. And so they decided to focus on those principles that would make that happen, although you will find in there that it does have some anti-statements about their, you know, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and those kinds of things, that all needs to be abolished. It's very clear about that, and that space needs to be used for peaceful purposes. But they are also, you will find a principle in there about that peace starts with the individual, and the individual being peaceful at the core and then moving out from that. So it was a very deep discussion. Many Buddhists and like-minded folks were involved in some of those discussions.
It would have been good to be a fly on a wall in those, I guess.
Yeah.
How about other discussions on tolerance altogether, where we have so many countries, well, our own included, where groups are not well tolerated? Is this a question for you, George?
It's George's turn.
Yeah, George. Ethics.
The roots of discrimination are one of the huge factors that as a human society, if we're going to have an ethical, sustainable society, we have to address. And the Earth Charter basically says no discrimination for any reason whatsoever, period. And it goes down the list, and it's a very comprehensive list. It's one of the only organizations that I know of that lists sexual identity as one of the reasons you can't discriminate against people. Discrimination is an exclusionary process that gets people outside of a community. And so the Earth Charter is aimed at putting everybody inside the community. If you've ever been in, and I'm sure you have, in discussions with people about what it feels like to be discriminated against. As a female, you probably have had that kind of an experience. It's an exclusionary experience, usually based on the person who's doing the discrimination getting some kind of power payoff. In other words, if you're down, I'm up. That kind of an argument. If you construct a ethical society where everybody's up and there's no reason to put people down, then the barriers for discrimination begin to fall away. Some of the ways to do that is to have conversations whose baseline is no violence, no argument. We're here to try and work things out. I'll give you one good example. The Institute for Global Ethics brought together demonstrators, both pro and con, on the abortion issue. Brought them into the same room and said, you can talk about anything but
Do they take their
abortion.
weapons?
Yeah, and they took the
They
weapons
took
at the
their
door
weapons
first,
first
yeah.
at the door, all right.
But what they had to do is come up with a common agreement on values. Well, guess what? They totally agreed on values. What they disagreed on was the behaviors that showed those values. And when they came out, the other people had immensely more respect for the other side, realizing that they were doing what they were doing because they were motivated by the same moral principle, that they weren't really the enemy, that they were just like them. They were searching for some way to meet those values. Well, that's the kind of conversation that we want communities to carry out, so that you begin to see that people aren't an enemy. They're not out to destroy you. They're sincerely motivated by the same values you are, but in their life, their behavior, the way that they try to reach those values are different. If you sit around and have a conversation over how can we preserve the value of human life, that's a very different conversation than you're wrong, no, you're wrong. And so that's what the Earth Charter
I
does.
think whoever
among its
conducted that particular thing, we need to like get them everywhere.
Clone 'em.
Because that's a good one. You're on Speak Up.
Hi, I think everybody listening and watching can agree that this is an enormous undertaking. There are many components that would need to be addressed for some measure of success to happen. And I just wondered if you work in conjunction, or if Earth Charter works in conjunction with other national or international organizations on slices of this, because there are so many different issues that make up the huge worldwide component of what you're talking about.
Good question. Well, of course, I did click on Florida and see you had bunches of groups that, are those people you're working with or just that are endorsing it, or are there
Those
other?
were 50 different organizations that endorsed our summits,
Okay.
that are already fulfilling different principles of the Earth Charter. One very good way to use the Earth Charter is to see it as a connecting, unifying tool that unifies all these organizations that are fulfilling different principles in economic justice and human rights, et cetera, so that we can see we're all going in the same direction and we can feel more connected to one another and have a larger collective energy. So I see the Earth Charter as a wonderful unifying tool. Earth Charter International is working with UNESCO in different countries. There are youth organizations globally that are working together with the Earth Charter. And here in the U.S., we have Co-op America, Sierra Club, name them. I can't remember all of them.
So they're doing what the questioner asked, which is like, they've taken a piece of this.
Right.
And they're trying to work very hard on that piece.
Yes, and they're seeing themselves connected to the Earth Charter.
You know, this measuring what would be success or that people are moving it along, is that going to be different for each community, or will there be could you make measurements that would be applicable everywhere, or at least maybe in the state of Florida or the United States?
Part of the process in creating community indicators is the process. When you go out to people and you say, what is it that's the most important thing in your life? And they say parks or jobs or bigger streets, or whatever it is that they say. And then you measure it, and then you come back and say, is that, what do you think? Well, community is going to say, well, no, I guess that really wasn't what I wanted. I really wanted, and so it becomes a conversation. As a psychologist, I know that whatever you measure is what changes. So if you're measuring people's positive feelings about the community, and it's part of a conversation, then people are going to work to make that happen. And that's the motivation behind it. So it's not really a questionnaire you hand out, it's a process, it's a community-wide discussion about what's the most important things to us, and then are we, as a community, doing those things? If the community says, for instance, we really like parks, and the city government is saying, well, we really like condos, and so we're going to build condos on your parks. Well, that sets up a conflict between the government and the people in the community. And there's no way now to have a conversation and say to them, hey, that's not really what we want, number one. Number two, it's damaging to our sense of community.
I think you will find common values that are going to be shared from community to community, because that's what the Earth Charter really basically is a set of common values. But you will find indicators, different indicators. I mean, we're not looking for comparable studies, you know, so they're going to be different. They're going to be specific for that community.
That would be better. You're on Speak Up.
Yes, first I'd like to thank you for emphasizing the power of the young people. My generation was labeled X. I hope the next one isn't Y for why do we do something in time. My question for you folks is that regarding the cloning of animals and also DNA data banks to keep animals that may perhaps be extinct. What are their thoughts on that? And thank you for the time.
Thank you.
God, I haven't thought about it.
Well, I don't know that the Earth Charter addresses it directly, except in that it says that there is a respect for the community of life. And then there's a very forward-thinking one that says to secure Earth's bounty and beauty for future generations. I could see an argument for storing DNA of animals that are going extinct, but I cannot see an argument for cloning. Now, I know that all my science friends are going to come after me with clubs because they're going to say, well, we can clone sheep to make insulin and that'll save people's lives. But I think that the larger issue about respect for all the community of life, when you say that one group of life is going to be slaves for another group of life solely and only for the benefit of one and to the exclusion of the benefit of the other, I think that crosses the line that the Earth Charter puts out. I'm not totally closed to the discussion, but that's how I look at it.
And I remember just recently reading about people who are interested in cloning their pets so that they continue to have them forever and ever, and it was just a sort of odd thing to think about.
It was an interesting, one of the statements, one of the statements under the principles that describes it says that you manage the use of renewable resources such as water, soil, forest products, and marine life, but you could extend that to anything, in ways that do not exceed rates of regeneration and that protect the health of ecosystems, so that some of these questions and the answers to some of those questions would need to consider how dramatically you're going to change the way in which ecosystems operate.
I went to a conference, I think it was like 5 or 6 years ago. I think it was League of Model Cities or something like that. And the mayor of DC spoke, and I've forgotten his name, Andrew something. Young, maybe, no, was it? No. I've forgotten his name. But when he got up, when he became mayor, he actually called a meeting of everybody in DC. And apparently newspapers made fun of him and everything. And he just said, you know, come down to wherever, the convention center, I want to get together with you and decide what you want from this city. And so maybe like a few hundred people showed up. And they started writing a plan, and then he made a report. And he said, okay, everybody who wants to come, this is what these folks said. You know, do you want to comment on it? And they did this very thing where they said, you know, I want more trees. And so pretty soon, 4,000 and 5,000 and 10,000 people were showing up at this town hall and giving the mayor some ideas. And they actually wrote a mission plan for DC that followed this, what the people said. And then it said it gave meaning to every employee, by the way, because they decided, okay, we want I forgot the number, but let's say it was 1,000 more trees in town. And how many are you going to take responsibility for, and how many should the government take responsibility for? And so they divvied it up. And so the citizens actually said, you know, we'll take responsibility for a certain percentage of it ourselves. The Parks Department can do this much, and another department could do that. And then under each department, they had this particular goal, and then each person's job responsibility fed into getting this tree done, or whatever all the other things were. And it was, I mean, he got a standing ovation. It was just the most remarkable thing, but it sounds like this. It sounds like where he was an actual leader. I mean, I don't know how he's turned out. I don't know if he's grand and, you know, been a great politician since then, but it was very, very impressive. And he was leading the people to come forward and and define what you're asking them to do too, and these indicators define what in the world they really want, that will measure or appropriately measure these goals.
You know, I'm not fully aware of some of this research, but there is some going on, some stuff being written today about how much better the decisions of groups are than the decisions made by individuals. And so this kind of process actually builds on that.
And you need to make sure that you have all people represented in those groups, and that's a failing in some of these gatherings. And so we intend to engage 10,000 people in the development of these indicators, and that means, you know, going to ethnic festivals and wherever we can, softball games for kids, wherever, to get people's input into what they think.
We're running low on time. We got about 4 or 5 minutes. I want to give each one of you a minute and a half to make any comment that you think the viewer ought to know that we didn't get to talk about that you think is important.
One of the things that I think is very important is that I think people feel a little overwhelmed when they hear this is an international document, 16 principles that our principals we're very familiar with, and how are we going to make that all happen, and it'll never happen, some people think. And one of the things I like to talk about is how in the women's movement, so much happened when women came together and like-minded men in small groups
consciousness raising,
to talk about them seeing themselves differently as beings who are equal in the world, and then going out into whatever their sphere of influence was, whether it was into the kitchen to tell their husband to do the dishes 3 times that week, or whether it was in the workplace to demand comparable pay, whatever. That's how that movement grew. And that's one of the things we're working on, an Art of Earth Chartering guide for people to use in small discussions where they will see themselves as interdependent beings, and therefore what does that mean? How do I behave? How do I make that real in my sphere of influence?
I think the important part of the Earth Charter is that it tells us that we're all more the same and that the differences are very few between us.
Genie?
And for me, I like the Earth Scouts motto, change the world one fun badge at a time. And go to www.eccommunities.org.
Thank you for tuning in. We hope to see you next week. Have a good week.